Okay, so it's about time we finally had this video. Welcome to part 2. I had some kind of opening gag scripted for this, but I decided to drop it. So yeah, there's that. But anyway, we're now just getting on with the video. I'm very sorry that it took so long. I'm sorry that the delays kept going. Again, massive thank you to the 1,000 subscribers I have now. Thank you very much. Thank you for being so patient. So this video is for you. And welcome to part 2 of my top 20 favorite UK and US steam locomotives, which I would like to refer to as the London and Northeastern Van Swearingen Special. For the simple reason that there are some London and Northeastern locomotives in this part, and Van Swearingen Berkshires, or locomotives that are very similar to Van Swearingen Berkshires. So there we are. Now, let's begin the actual friggin' countdown, shall we? Let's. Shut up. Number 15. Nickel Plate Road number 765. As you can see, we're starting this part off with one of the two Van Swearingen Berkshires here. Yes, it was going to be two Van Swearingen Berkshires, two London and Northeastern locomotives, and a locomotive that's similar to the Van Swearingen Berkshires. So there you go. Oh, and by the way, yes, Berkshires have a 284 wheel arrangement. As if that wasn't enough from looking at the 1225. But yeah, I forgot to say that in the last part. And hey, they are good locomotives. And the New York, Chicago, and St. Louis Railroad, better known as the Nickel Plate Road, was also a keen user of the Van Swearingen Berkshires. They had 80 of them, numbered 700 through 779, built between 1934 and 1949. So basically they were built in relatively small batches throughout the total of all of the Van Swearingen Berks.
And with each new order came small modifications and improvements, right? That makes sense to me, but I thought I'd ask anyway.
Yes, that is quite common. And the nickel plate is pretty well represented, with 6 of their engines being among 20 surviving Van Swearingen Berks. Those being engines 755, 757, 759, 763, 765, and 779. The last being the final steam locomotive built by Lima Locomotive Works in Ohio. The 765 worked for the nickel plate for 14 years, from the time of its construction in 1944 to its withdrawal from service in 1958. When retired, 765 was donated to the city of Fort Wayne, Indiana, and placed on display in Lawton Park in 1962.
I think I remember a few things about this one.
Okay, let's hear it.
Wasn't it temporarily cosplaying as classmate 767 when it was donated? I remember you and Jim saying that the real 767 had historical ties with that city.
Indeed it was. Good catch, AJ. The 767 was present at the opening of a new railroad viaduct that was built in Fort Wayne as part of the Elevate the Nickel Plate project, and thus they wanted the 767 on display to honor that project. But when withdrawn, the 767 was in poor condition.
So they donated the 765 because it was in better shape and disguised as 767. Good compromise.
No.
Moving on, in 1972, the fortune of 765 was about to turn for the better when Glenn Brendel, Wayne York, Walter Salzmanhausen, and John Eichmann became the first officers of the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society. These gentlemen were dedicated to finding a new display site for the locomotive, and maybe, just maybe, restore it to working order. Said restoration efforts began in 1975, and were culminated in 1979. And of course, several of the Society's members who were involved with the restoration put their hands on the throttle, or regulator for the British audience, and pulled slowly. Steam collected in the dome, rushed through the valves and passages, into the cylinders, breathing new life into the 765. And then the driving wheels turned over in a slip, and 21 years of rust on the tires flew into the air. It was a cause for celebration.
It should also be noted that 765 and the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society broke a record with the engine's first restoration. It was the largest steam locomotive to ever be restored outdoors without the use of conventional shop facilities.
That was quite impressive. Any major differences between this and the 1225?
Good question. I'm a bit curious about that one as well.
From what I've discovered, 1225 is a bit more primitive with friction bearings, whereas 765 has roller bearings. And 1225's boiler is actually an inch bigger in diameter, I believe. But that's about differences that I can tell. Also, when it comes to fame, 765 is the more popular of the two with the steam enthusiasts, for having steamed more often in the preservation era. And you may have noticed from a few pictures in the past video that 1225 and the other PM Berks didn't always have those lighted number boards flanking the bell.
Ah, I didn't really notice that though.
And now you know. But anyways, moving along, the 765 remained in excursion service until 1993. During that year, it masqueraded as Chesapeake and Ohio Kanawha number 2765, pulling the annual New River train in West Virginia. After the New River trips ended, the engine returned home to Fort Wayne, and the Society began the task of tearing down the engine for another overhaul. This time, though, the overhaul was more extensive. The boiler, frame, and running gear were separated, and major components were remachined or rebuilt entirely. This major bit of surgery was completed in late 2005, and the 765 has been in excursion service ever since. The engine even got to masquerade as the 767 again for the late 2016 season. Also, fun fact for those who keep tabs on my YouTube channel, I've had the pleasure of seeing 765 6 times almost in a row from 2009 through 2015.
Nifty! And we made it through without doing any weird jokes.
What? No. Here comes a quick one.
Really? What is it?
Jump.
You utter...
We've done that joke 3 times in part 1. We're not doing it again. I'll let him chill for a bit.
I still hate you.
Aw, so you do think about me.
I think you just set him on fire with that burn. Hey viewers, can you count to 1, 2, third-degree burns?
Okay, let's continue.
Yes. Gentlemen, it is LNER time.
Number 14. London and Northeastern, number 4771. Green Arrow. Here's another good engine. This is the first of Gresley's V2 class 262 Prairies, of which 184 were manufactured between 1936 and 1944. Numbering was a bit odd as they weren't all numbered in the same numerical slots. So if you were doing the math, it wasn't a straight 4771 through 4954. Only the first 129 of them were numbered like that. So it was 4771 through 4899. The remaining 55 were then numbered 3641 through 3695. And if you think this numbering is weird, you haven't seen the V2's big brothers, the A3 Pacifics, yet.
Why couldn't they stick with just one continuous row of numbers? Were they drunk? Because that's my job.
No, although they did like whiskey. They did actually do this with other classes as well, especially in Gresley's days. However, Green Arrow is also sadly the only survivor of the V2 class. That also makes her the only surviving 262 tender engine in the United Kingdom. There were only a few other 262 tender engines built in the UK, namely the Midland Railway's Paget locomotive and Gresley's pair of V4s. But they weren't very successful, while the V2s were very successful. In fact, Green Arrow and the other V2s were basically candidates for the title Engines That Won the War.
It makes sense given how production continued into the Second World War. Any other reasons why people say they won the war?
Short and sweet, quick and powerful, mixed traffic engines. We can let our man from Amsterdam explain more.
He's actually from Rotterdam. But yes, Green Arrow and the other V2s were famed to be the locomotives that won the Second World War in the UK, because their 78-inch diameter driving wheels allowed them to reach high speeds. In fact, some say that one of them was clocked at around 100 miles an hour during test runs. Very useful for hauling fish trains from Aberdeen to London, but critical for moving wartime supplies. And thanks to that bit of Gresley magic, these engines were able to do anything asked of them.
I need to find someone who can teach me some of that magic. I have a few practical applications for it, and I can't wait to test all of them out on Jimmy Coon.
Shove a can of gasoline. You know what? Never mind. Sometimes you're a gutter mind, AJ. Anyhow, the prototype locomotive, 4771, was named Green Arrow, after a fish train. Sure, a bit of a fishy name, but the engine was green and it sped along like an arrow. She served the LNER, later the eastern region of British Railways, for a little over 26 years. Withdrawn in 1962, the original idea was to have her placed at a municipal museum in Leicester. But those plans were cancelled when that museum was demolished before she could move in. Fortunately, the National Railway Museum in York was being planned out at the time, and Green Arrow joined its national collection towards the end of 1971. And of course, Green Arrow was also restored to working order a few years later, gaining a temporary home at Carnforth in 1973. She had a long and happy career in the preservation era, being used for mainline rail tours, excursion specials, and visiting several private railways.
She was brought out of traffic from service in 2008, when her boiler certificate expired. Another reason for her retirement is a crack in her cylinder block, as the V2s had all three cylinders cast in the same chunk of steel, so if one of these was knackered, the whole block had to be replaced. Today, she's on display at the National Rail Museum locomotion site at Shieldham, although, in 2015, it was announced that Green Arrow is one of the planned exhibits for the Great Central Railway's proposed Railway Museum, located at Leicester North Station.
Number 13. Chesapeake and Ohio number 614. Before we get into the story of this locomotive, I would like to apologize for the fact that Chris and I have actually been here before. In fact, Chris has been here twice before. But now to kind of even the odds a little bit, I'll be doing the bulk of the narration. Now as you can see, 614 isn't a 284 Berkshire, or a Kanawha as the CNO called them. Instead, it's a 484 Northern, or as they're known on the CNO, a Greenbrier, named in honor of the Greenbrier Hotel in the city of White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, which was a pretty big stop for the CNO's passenger trains. But as you can see, the 614 does look very similar to the Van Swergen Berkshire design. Almost like it's a bigger, bulkier evolution of it. And while we're here, I would also like to admit a mistake I made in a previous video.
What mistake?
In my top 10 retired steam excursion stars, from Britain and America of course, where 614 scored the number 6 spot, I said that the CNO had 15 Greenbriers. But apparently that wasn't true. They only had 12 of them, built between 1935 and 1948.
Simple mistake because you missed something in your research.
Yeah. The first 7 were numbered 600 through 606 and classified as J3s, and they actually looked a little bit more vintage, as you can see from this picture of number 600. And each one of them was actually named after a famous Virginian statesman, and the names and road numbers can be seen right now. The other 5, though, were numbered 610 through 614, and they were designated as J3As, given their more modern and substantial appearance. But long story short, yes, even if it was unintentional,
I lied.
my humble apology for the mistake.
I didn't even notice that one myself, but good on you for correcting it. And don't let AJ get into commando mode, or even worse, Terminator mode.
Get to the chopper!
Shut up, Gabe Swayla!
Okay, sorry.
Thank you. Long story short, as short as I possibly can get it, 614 operated on the Chesapeake and Ohio for only 7 years before being retired in 1955. Following a brief return to service and renumbered as 611, due to the C&O borrowing other 484s from the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad, with one of those numbered 614, the engine was stored at the scrap lines near the C&O's diesel shops in Russell, Kentucky throughout the 1960s. But eventually she found a much safer home at the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum in Baltimore, Maryland, moving in there in 1975. In 1979, though, things went from good to better, when she was acquired by railroader and businessman Ross Rowland in a trade for another 484 locomotive, Reading 2101.
What was the reason for the trade, though? Was the 2101 pulled from service?
Yes, it was because of a minor accident, that being a catastrophic roundhouse fire in Russell.
Oh, that's a bad case of spontaneous combustion. That poor giant.
Yes, that's pretty much a finisher. What did the museum do with it, though?
The museum cosmetically restored the engine into one of its other liveries as American Freedom Train Number 1. But from my first-hand experience seeing the engine on display, it doesn't look that great today.
Going back to 614, the engine was back under steam only a year after the trade was completed, proceeding to pull the Chessie Safety Express on a system-wide tour of the Chessie Railroad that ended in 1981. And it was basically a rolling exhibit train that educated the public on grade crossing safety.
I can educate the people on grade crossing safety too. If we hear an awful lot of noise and see blinking red lights and barriers go down, stop. It's that simple, for crying out loud. Otherwise we'll die and give the crews driving the trains PTSD.
Everybody got that?
After 4 years of storage in Hagerstown, Maryland, and another rebuild, 614 was then used throughout January of 1985 for hauling loaded and empty coal trains on the New River Gorge between the cities of Huntington and Hinton, West Virginia. A noticeable change was that she was now renumbered to 614T, with the T denoting test engine. That's because our favorite Greenbrier was now fitted to the brim with sensors and scientific equipment that recorded the locomotive's performance. This was used as data for the design process of Rowland's new project, the Ace 3000 steam locomotive.
Oh dear. That's looking a bit bizarre. How did this idea even originate?
It originated through Rowland's company, American Coal Enterprises, along with the initiative to build a new coal-fired locomotive that was supposed to reduce dependence on foreign oil at the time. But when the oil prices dropped, these plans were cancelled, even with 614's promising results and stunning performances in the freezing weather. Following a decade of storage, 614 was rebuilt again. This time, the veteran Greenbrier was used for excursion passenger trains between Hoboken, New Jersey and Port Jervis, New York in the late 1990s. Plus, she was allowed to fly along the main line, reaching speeds of up to 80 miles per hour. Following those excursions, 614 was stored for some time before being placed on display at the C&O Heritage Center in Clifton Forge, Virginia. And I'm afraid I still don't like the Greenbrier Presidential Express livery.
But it's a Greenbrier. The clue is in the name the C&O gave these engines.
Well, he's got you there, Jim.
Yes, he did. But these days, Ross has plans to restore 614 again. This time, though, it's for his new Yellow Ribbon Express, which will include a rather ambitious project. That project being to convert the locomotive from burning coal to burning natural gas. Here's to the hope that it won't be like some of the ambitious undertakings by Jeremy Clarkson, like his P-45, where he tried to beat the Peel P-50 for the title of the world's smallest production car.
Ah, good memories. And I'm already calling it yellow paint job on 614 for the Yellow Ribbon Express.
You're on the Colour Burn Express?
Oh, why thank you.
Number 12. London and Northeastern number 532. Blue Peter. About time I started to talk about some 462 Pacifics. Blue Blue Peter here is the sole survivor of the LNER A2 class specifics. And during the research of this video, I actually learned that the LNER had 3 distinctive Pacific designs that were all classified as A2s over the years.
How different were they from each other?
Really different. First, there was this old but quite pretty design by Sir Vincent Raven for the Northeastern Railway, of which only 5 were made in the early 1920s. These can be called 2400s or cities, since they were numbered 2400 through 2404 and named after cities along the London and Northeastern system. Then, of course, there were these modern abominations designed by Edward Thompson, of which 25 were built between 1944 and 1947, and divided into the classes A2/1, A2/2, and A2/3. Now, credit where it's due, the A2/1s and A2/3s were actually good performers. But they all look ugly. And if I were to make a list of my least favorite steam engines, the A2/2s would be up there for obvious reasons, combining bad performance with ungainly looks.
I can kind of see why. That cylinder placement looks ridiculous.
Yes. But 532 was from the third A2 design, created by Arthur Peppercorn, of which 15 were built between 1947 and 1948, and numbered 525 through 539. Also, Blue Peter wasn't actually made by the London and Northeastern when it was still the London and Northeastern, but rather the Eastern region of British Railways. So yes, her real road number should be 60532, since LNER locomotives got 60,000 attached to their road numbers at the time. But the engine has run as LNER 532 in preservation for a while. Sure, it's historically inaccurate, but honestly, I like it. It's like realizing Peppercorn's original idea. Heck, preservationists pulled the same stunt with the sole surviving K1 mogul 2005. You know, before going the boring way again.
Ah, I see. Now for the obvious question. If the locomotive was called Blue Peter, why is it green?
It was named after a racehorse.
Ah, no more horsing around then, before things get too far down the drain.
Right then, Blue Peter was retired from service on the last day of 1966. She was purchased by Jeff Drury in 1968 as a compromise when the last of Peppercorn's 49 A1 Pacifics were cut up.
That man actually bought another LNER Pacific before, that being A4, number 4464. Bitter.
Indeed. Blue Peter was restored in 1971 and named on the BBC's television programme of the same name. But it didn't run very much for the next 2 decades, only a bit in 1987, but after a second naming ceremony in 1991, also on the Blue Peter programme, the engine was moved to the North Yorkshire Moors Railway for running in. It obtained its mainline certificate in 1992 and subsequently worked many rail tours over the Sutherland Carlisle Railway, and as far north as its old depot of Aberdeen.
But Blue Peter had an accident of her own in 1994. Not as bad as the 2101's case of spontaneous combustion in 1979, but still pretty bad. Simply put, Blue Peter suffered extensive damage during a catastrophic wheel slip. The full story goes that during a station stop at Durham, the crew overfilled the boiler. The train departed on a steep grade up to Riley Mill, and the initial slip was poorly controlled by the driver. He then reopened the throttle, or regulator, too early, probably to prevent the train stalling on the grade. The initial force of the slip caused the boiler to prime, or carry water over into the regulator valve and jam it open. Steam rushed through the valve to the cylinders, letting the slip continue and accelerating the driving wheels, which for the record were 74 inches in diameter. The driver tried to wind the reversing gear back to neutral to haul the slip, but the force of the motion spun it into full forward, and the driving wheels reached a rotational speed of 140 miles an hour before the cylinder heads blew off, and the motion disintegrated.
Okay, where's James May when you need him?
Cock.
The driver, or engineer, suffered major injuries to his arms as a result of screwing the reversing lever, whipping round when he released it. The accident brought to light the importance of loco crews being trained on specific locomotives that they were driving, rather than simply a common general instruction on steam locomotives. Neither the driver or the fireman had ever worked on Blue Peter before, and were unaware of the locomotive's sensitivity to priming.
Plus, even if it wasn't intentional, now you have a good argument why the T1 Trust shouldn't try smashing Mallard's record. Safety for the crew above all things. Anyway, the damage that Blue Peter suffered was devastating. She was moved to Thornaby MPD, where she spent 18 months for repairs. Once finished, she returned to the North Yorkshire Moors Railway for running in. Her mainline career was then resumed in 1996, working a charter train from Middlesbrough to Preston via Newcastle and Carlisle. Another notable run was made in 1998 for the 40th anniversary of the Blue Peter TV program.
After her mainline ticket expired in 2001, her boiler certificate expired in 2002. Blue Peter was displayed at the Darlington Railway Centre and Museum. On the 22nd of May 2007, BBC Look North reported that the locomotive was being moved into storage in Chesterfield due to the renovation of the museum and would not be returning. Also, for many years, Blue Peter was the only surviving LNER steam locomotive based on a peppercorn design. But thankfully, those loner days were over when in 2008, a genuine 50th classmate of the A1 Pacific called Tornado was finally finished after 19 years of construction. And for a while, Blue Peter and Tornado were both painted in BR apple green.
Today, Blue Peter is undergoing another big overhaul, which includes the installation of a new firebox. If everything goes to plan, the A2 will be back in good time. Who knows? She might even be painted BR Express Passenger Blue for a change.
Number 11. Chesapeake and Ohio, number 2716. Yes, Chris and I have been here before as well. But again, I actually like the engine too much not to give another talk about it. Sorry. And to be fair, you can't talk about the Van Swergen Berkshires without mentioning the C&O's Kanawhas, named after the Kanawha River, and most often used on the double-track mainline of the Kanawha subdivision, located on the banks of that river. These were the most numerously produced of the Van Swergen Berkshires, with 90 of them manufactured between 1943 and 1947, and numbered 2700 through 2789.
Meh, it's fine. And yes, even today, the Kanawhas are the most numerous of the Van Swergen Berks. Of the 20 survivors, 12 of them are C&O Kanawhas, which also makes them some of the most numerously preserved steam locomotives in the USA.
Okay, that's pretty generous of those men. 90 built, 12 survivors, quite impressive.
It is. And 2716 here can be seen as the most popular one. Retired in 1956, it was either donated or sold to the Kentucky Railway Museum in 1959, when it was located at its original site in Louisville, Kentucky. Following a canceled lease to the Clinchfield Railroad in 1979 for their steam excursions, the Kanawha was purchased by the Southern Railway from the United States, not the United Kingdom. The engine was then restored at the Irondale Steam Shops in Birmingham, Alabama, and also giving a cosmetic makeover into what a Southern Railway Berkshire would have looked like if they had actually purchased them. Smokebox mounted headlight, brass eagle on top, brass pillars to the sides, rectangular number plate underneath, etc.
American Southern, of course. I don't think British Southern's malachite green would be a good colour for the locomotive at all.
Me neither. Sadly though, 2716 ran with the Southern for only a year before cracks in the firebox sidelined the locomotive. This was a pretty bitter pill to swallow, seeing how 2716 was the perfect compromise locomotive, as its two predecessors didn't have a good balance between power and speed.
What were the predecessors then?
Those were Texas and Pacific, number 610, a 210-4 Texas type, and Canadian Pacific number 2839, a 464 Royal Hudson. When we're talking about excursion passenger duties, simply put, 610 could pull massive passenger trains, but do so very slowly. On the other side, 2839 could rocket along, but with significantly smaller trains compared to 610.
Ah, so 2716 was the perfect balance between speed and power. Jeremy Clarkson approved. Bring the seal of approval.
Speed and power are his favourite ingredients, so I can see why you'd say that.
The Royal Hudson looks a bit like a beer can if you ask me.
Forgiven. In fact, they actually called it a beer can, for obvious reasons. Now, in order to keep excursion trains rolling, 765 was called in as a replacement. Then in 1982, 2716 was retired in favor of Norfolk and Western 611, where the Southern Railway merged with the Norfolk and Western to become the current Norfolk Southern Railroad. Luckily, in the early 1990s, the 2716 was leased by the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society, allowing her to be a running mate to 765. The crew there reverted her back to the C&O appearance and fixed the firebox issues, and then they used the Kanawha on a few excursion passenger trains out of the city of Logansport, Indiana in 1996. Sadly, this was yet another excursion career that was cut short. This time, 2716's flues were about to expire.
So the engine got sick. Got it. Let me guess, you're about to explain what they are.
Yes. Flues on steam locomotives are the tubes inside the boiler that carry the smoke and the combustion gases from the firebox to the smoke box. As they pass through, the flues get hot, heating the water around them, boiling it, and thus producing steam. The Fort Wayne crew decided to retire 2716 because its flues were about to expire because they were in bad condition. And instead they went for a full rebuild on 765.
I see why. They basically got a new locomotive out of it when they were finally finished.
But since February the 7th of 2016, things are shining again for 2716, as a new lease was signed with the newly formed Kentucky Steam Heritage Corporation. This organization is rebuilding 2716 for excursion service on nearby shortline railroads. Because, let's face it, CSX wouldn't do it because they're idiots.
Well, that took you longer than anticipated.
Sorry! Also, kudos to Kishko for the neat masquerade as Big Emma number 1992. Yes, again, what would have been the next member if production had continued. So, that was part 2. Not quite as silly, but we still hoped you learned a few things and had a few laughs.
Now the lights are off. And game on.
He's gonna get wrecked in Fall of Cybertron, yeah.
So, when can we expect the script for part 3? 2 years? 7 years? A decade? Century? Couple of centuries?
Hopefully in a month or so.
Provided my microphone doesn't play up again, then yeah, I'm fine with that. How about you, Gabe?
No.
Shut up, Consuela! I mean, Gabe!
Sorry I had to do it again. This video is something but a bit of a hell.
I'll catch all of you in a month or so. Not you guys, but the audience. Till then, viewers.
And cue the angry Gabe in 3, 2, 1.
What? How did he kill me with one shot? You mugger!